Now we will see how we can configure the input element to create a password box. This is almost like a text box, except that we will be setting the type attribute to password as its value. So I'm just going to copy what I have here from line 9, and I'll just create it right up here. So I'll say password, and then I'll paste what I had. But I'll go ahead and change this value to password, and then I'm going to name it p-word and the ID as well. And usually these would be the attributes that you would see, but you can use size to set the max width for the field or the box. You can use max length to indicate how many characters you want to accept for the password. And then you can also use value to give it a value. So I'm going to just go ahead and use max length. Most times you want number of characters to be limited for a password. So I'll set it to 12. Actually, let's set it. So now I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'll render it so we can see what that looks like. So now you see that I have a field for password. I have a password box. But one thing about assigning the type attribute to password, when I'm typing in here, you'll not see what I'm entering. And this is for if you have someone looking over your shoulder when you're putting in your password, it doesn't show. So I'm actually going to put in a password. And because I limited it to 10 characters, I can only enter up to 10 characters, and then it doesn't allow me to enter anything else. And it doesn't show what I've entered in there because that's how we configured it. We can configure a checkbox as well. So we're using the input element once more, and this time we're going to assign the type attribute the value of checkbox. I'm going to put that maybe after this. So I'm going to add input element here, and then I'm going to change the type value to checkbox on line 18. I'm going to give the name Internet Explorer, since that is the option for this first checkbox. I'll do the same thing here. And again, type, name, and ID are typically going to be the attributes that you will use for creating checkboxes, but you can also use attribute of checked as well as attribute of value to configure your checkbox. So I'll go ahead and add value and assign it to yes. So value is going to assign a value to the checkbox that will be triggered when that checkbox is checked. It's going to be accessed by the client side and server side process. For checked, if I included that, it will configure the checkbox to be checked by default when it's displayed by the browser. So I guess we can go ahead and add check to one of them so that it can be configured by default as the option that is the favorite, and then you can change it if it's not your option. So I'm going to expand this a little bit to add the other ones. So I copied it to lines 19 and 20, but I'm going to have to change the name. So I'm doing Firefox here, same thing here. I'm doing Opera here, and same thing here. And I'm going to add the checked attribute for Firefox. That's assuming Firefox might be the most preferred browser that we want. Now, let me just add a paragraph that will say, choose the browsers you use. Now, most times when you have checkbox configured, it allows the person to select more than one option. It's the radio button that's only going to allow one option to be selected. So anyway, we're now going to save the changes, and then let me put the colon there and then render this to see what it looks like. And we have that here, but we need to add the options, which I did not add. This is what gets to be shown. It's the little things when you forget, but you can always fix it. All right, so now I should have my text to show. And there you go. And by default, Firefox is checked. I can also check others. I can uncheck Firefox. And so this is how you configure your checkbox. Now let's see what happens with the radio button when it's configured. So we can actually use the input element as well to configure the radio button. So here we're configuring radio buttons. I've already copied the code from here and made some changes. So I'll just explain the changes. I've got the input element with the type attribute set to radio, so that we'll have radio buttons, text controls, and then we'll have our name attribute set to something that is consistently the same across all options. This is going to enforce that only one option can be checked. So all of them have the same name, so there will only be one that can be checked. And then the IDs are going to be different because they have to be unique. And then, of course, we've got the value, but in this case, the value is going to be set to each of the options, kind of like synonymous with the actions. So we have IE, Firefox, and Opera. We still have to put the text that we want the person to see. So I have Internet Explorer, Firefox, Opera. So now I'm going to render this and we'll see what happens. So we already had Firefox checked by default using a checked attribute. But if I click on Internet Explorer, it's no longer checked because I can only select one option. So this is used for just one option. We can also configure a hidden input control. So we are going to use the input element again for that, but I'm not going to demonstrate this because you won't get to see it. This is just something that is accessed by client side and server side. So we won't really see any effects of it, but just know that you can configure hidden input control. You can use the input element, and the only thing is you're having the type set to the value of hidden. You can have the name and the ID configured. They both should be basically the same value. And then for value, this will assign a value to the hidden control so it can be accessed by client-side scripting languages and server-side processing. We can also do what's called a selection list so that we can offer options that our visitor can select. And we're using the option element for that along with the select element. So we're going to look at how we can do that. So we'll first start with the select element, and we use the size attribute, which is typically set to a value of 1. Then we use the name attribute, and we will have it appropriately named for what we're collecting, and we'll give the ID the same thing. I'm going to close it here so I don't forget. And then next I'm going to put the options in. So we're going to use the option element, say select your favorite browser. Then we use the option with the value attribute and set it to the first option, in this case Internet Explorer. And then we put the label there, or the text there that the person will see. And then next we close that. So I'm just going to copy this and change the values. So now I'm going to put Firefox and Opera. And I've got all of my options configured. So I'll go ahead and save this, and then we can render it and see what this looks like. And this is really for the one with the drop-down list. I guess I have a typo, F there. So the reason we use the option element on line 29 with just the prompt to tell the person to select their favorite browser is because that's what we want them to see first in the drop-down list to give them some context. So when we launch this, that's what they get to see here. But they can then select what exactly it is that they want. Okay. If we wanted it to look like what we have here, then we can do it differently. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste it. In this case, I'm going to make it 4. So I'm just going to give it a name of jump menu and an ID jump menu. And then we'll make some changes here to our option value. In this case, we're actually going to be pointing to the document for our web pages. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the value here as index.html. And then I'll have this as home. I'll also do the same thing for products. Same thing for services. And then I can copy and do the same thing for the last two, which happens to be about contact. Then I'm going to put some line breaks here so that we can have space between the two. And I have my jump menu here configured, home, product, services, about, contact. And then if I were to select home, that will be highlighted. If I do services, that will be highlighted, and so forth. So that's how you go ahead and use the option element to be able to configure a drop-down box or what is called a jump menu. So we'll stop here and continue from the next slide, but you should be able to do, I believe, problem 3 based on the information you've had so far.